Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you're watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey just joined our studio online and yes, hello, good evening. Let's start with the map. There are a lot of news today. There is Commander-in-Chief Syrsky with his statement that situation on the front is difficult. Let's start with that probably. Which part should we start with? Let's look at Pokrovsk in the middle of the map, but so that we can also see Kramatorsk up above. You can see Pokrovsk right in the middle, over here. We have some issues in this direction. This is basically a continuation of the same push that is happening after Avdiivka capture and Cheretina surrender. The enemy is expediting the speed of their move. They are rather quickly moving deeper inside. This is one of the beginning of, or the classic example of conversion from tactical success to operational success. A few days ago, there was a question whether they would go to Kurakhova instead, but they chose not to do that. They're going towards the road connecting Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka, that yellow road, to interrupt the transport of troops and supplies, one towards the road, another towards Toretsk. Now, if we make a step back, let's not do that. Let's go over the whole front and then pay more attention to this. And they also are pressing towards Chasov Yar. They dropped another paratroopers detachment there. Chasov Yar is above that. So here is Pokrovsk. Let's go higher, Toretsk. Over here, Konstantinovka and Chasov Yar is on the way. See the arrows getting to Chasov Yar? That's the area they need to take. So they're trying to cut communications between Konstantinovka and Toretsk. They're trying to encircle Toretsk. And Konstantinovka will be their next point of attention at the moment. They are moving a lot of troops along the front line. They're also transporting additional support to Kupyansk, where we can see now some of the defenses under huge stress, and 76th Division and the others are being thrown there. Kupyansk, Liman, so they're exerting extra pressure there, and our defense line has some issues there. And their dream, let's bring Bakhmut back in the middle. The dream would be to cut this protrusion around Severodonetsk. You can see the one on the right from Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. If that happens, they close their flanks along the Seversky Donetsk river, and joint front definitely gives them a huge advantage. By a sum of different things, they start helping each other, interacting better, and we will have to face their forces joint. They've been trying to do that for a while. They keep using different angles, trying to find a weaker point to do that, but we do have some detachments in this area that are not so easy to cut. Now, let's look at the whole front from Kherson to Kharkov. They are exerting pressure. They were doing that before over down south. And everywhere where they found weak spots, they're immediately throwing and reallocating troops to those parts, getting some tactical success there. And I was thinking about the nature of these successes for them. On the south, of course, the battle still ensues. They don't have that much of a notable success on the south, but they're still active. So one thing that I noticed is that they're moving a lot of troops alongside the horseshoe-shaped front. They're doing it rather quickly. So, first of all, they concentrate troops faster than we do. We would supposedly be faster than them because we're moving them alongside the inner part of that horseshoe area. And unfortunately, they are about 2.5 times faster, dropping their troops where they want to drop them. And what I'm thinking is, the reason for that is that they're fighting with divisions, armies, and corps. They have their own capability to move troops. We, unlike them, are fighting with brigades. Our brigade is very ill-equipped to move anywhere along the front without the help of the higher officers. So it's not self-reliant. For example, we don't have equipment to move heavy artillery, heavy armor, and then you face a lot of interaction between operative strategical transport, operative tactical command, and the rest. And our system to move troops is much more complicated. And that's what we talked about before. Until we have higher level of organization, like divisions and armies, instead of these organizations of tactical and operational command, we will be seeing the number of issues growing. And our military leadership is still failing to understand that this would be an easiest way to streamline the process. Because commander of a division, commander of corps just gives an order to move troops. He doesn't go anywhere to ask for it, doesn't go through a lot of bureaucracy. We're losing at the speed factor significantly. We should be moving faster than they are. We should be moving twice faster than they are. And this is a strategic mistake. We have talked about that before. We are talking again about it because it has a definite reflection on the battlefront. That's something you talked about Zaluzhny initiative back in the day that he was asking for and he was not allowed to. Right. This is a huge problem and it will be affecting a lot of things down the line. Second, the change of commander-in-chief and the head of command. Now we have a lot of brigade commanders being replaced, especially the ones on the front line. And when we're talking about a commander on the front line, however awesome and amazing commander you get, instead of the old one, there'll be some element of disorganization while he understands the layout and details. And look, here in the time when the enemy is actively pressing, we are replacing brigade commanders. And just like in the case of 115th, which possibly desires a proper investigation, which left Cheretina, in that case, they replaced a good commander with, let's be delicate here, say another new commander. So the question remains, why would it make sense to replace commanders in such a difficult time? There are also, according to my sources, movements and changes in the General Command headquarters. Is it so needed? Is the situation so dire that you had to replace these people with new figures at this given moment? Why is it being done? So that could be also a factor. And the third group of reasons, and I'll continue digging that topic, there could be fifth and fourth groups as well, but it is time for us to talk about it. They probably found, and I'm talking about the Russians now, on the operative level, a couple of smart heads. And as Napoleon said back in the day, people are nothing, human is everything. The moment you find two smart commanders in a certain direction, you will start getting success there. We unfortunately do not have these kind of successes right now, but we definitely can see that on the operative level, Russians have increased their capabilities. On the tactical, they're still doing the same thing. They're still dropping a lot of meat on our guns. But on the operative, they have changed. Look at the scale of the operations. They moved 76th from Rabotina down south to Kupyansk area. So they're moving troops all along the front line, along the whole horseshoe, 1,000 kilometers. And while we don't have an answer why and how, internally, defending our country, and we just have to be faster on our own roads, 2.5 times faster than the enemy, but we are failing to do so, and time after time we have another breakthrough, another collapse of some part of the front, like it happened on Cheretina. This becomes a key question that might have effect on the future negotiations in autumn, if they happen. It's essentially the question of how much territory will be occupied by the enemy, including some key points and towns. But by the looks of how it is developing, I think the loss of a few more towns in Donbass is practically guaranteed. That's despite mobilization, with which we were seriously late. We are about 3 months behind, at least, and American aid that also was delayed. These two matters were very connected, apparently. The moment we signed our mobilization bill, they signed Ukraine aid bill. And about a fifth of our duration of this war to take time, to take about a fifth of the time to vote for the mobilization bill, I think this is criminal. And I think our Rada, our Congress, is the one to blame. Because when you're ratifying this bill, there are only 35 congressmen, 1/10 what should be. This is horrible. And of course, we'll get American aid. It will have some effect. We're still not sure when we will have more troops, our mobilized troops on the front that will be able to change the flow. But for now, the enemy has the advantage. It figured a way to sense our weaknesses and is capitalizing on those weaknesses. Toretsk, get ready. And a little after that, Konstantinovka should get ready. And we'll see what happens on Lugansk front. So that's the story. All right, let's go back to Toretsk. We have that screenshot that we've been discussing before that stream. How realistic is that Russian armed forces would be able to encircle Toretsk this way? If so, what would be the time frame for this? Well, here I was drawing for you the remote plans. For now, the smaller pincer will probably appear around Toretsk, and that's their old technology that was found back in 1944. Small pincer, large pincer, and it works, and there is no reason to cancel it. 10 Stalin's blows, how they are taught in the Academy of Frunzer. There were signals this week, Alexey, from the relatives of servicemen on the front that supposedly fortification works have slowed down. And where they have already built something, some of the trenches were washed out by floods, weather, and element. What is the state of the fortification work? Could we have abandoned them halfway through? Right, Nikolai, there is a lot of rumors now about that. We need to find more data so we could operate with facts, but not rumors. But there are a lot of complaints coming from different directions, and it's definitely makes sense to dig deeper and understand what's going on there. I should not operate with rumors, so let's leave a question mark at this. There was also another question, Alexey. In your view, why, if Russia is using very actively their government corporations and private corporations to fortify the front, how come we are not doing the same thing on the Ukrainian side? Because we do have enough equipment that are used to build natural gas and other oil products, pipelines. Why are we not using their machinery? Corruption and low level of organization, Nikolai. Our administrative moves are very ill organized, and we do have a serious degree of corruption, and military construction is one of the very tasty pieces of pie that exists. And there was actually a bunch of requests from our military-industrial complex saying that, hey, we can produce more, but we need longer contracts. So we can buy more parts, more source materials. Unfortunately, we're still not doing that. Third year of war, we're still playing some tenders and smaller orders. And like right now, we're having a big issue with a scandal with food for military. So it seems like it's a big mess on the governmental level. Just look, this week, some parts of the front were pierced, collapsed. We're exacerbating the situation a little, but one can say that it's been pierced. Problems with food, problem with fortifications. System decisions are not being made. We've been shouting about them since at least September last year, right? Here. Today, Yuri Butusov published an article that caused rather wide resonance, where he talked about main answers to biggest questions. And fantastically, most of these answers are very much aligned with what I was talking about in December. Right, to say the least, majority. And the main key frame here is, in his article, is what is a victory for Ukraine? To stop Russian advancement and remain as an independent country with the maximum territory and access to Black Sea. That would probably be the biggest loss for Putin if we manage to achieve that. And I think that key goal was already achieved. So if we all can agree that this is one of the key elements of our victory, why should not we put that on paper? And does it need to be put on paper and affixed in some international treaty format? How should I answer that question, Nikolai? My position has not changed. Direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiations make sense only to implement a ceasefire. War can be stopped only on a different level, because, yeah, ceasefire, and that's operative level, but stopping this war altogether can be done only via negotiations about collective security system in Europe. These negotiations are being done via the peace formula. Erdogan suggested, basically through him, Russians suggested their plan. There is an American plan, American ideas how it could be, and unfortunately we have not come to everybody's agreement, so that's why the battle still ensues, and Russians still want to capture the remainder of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and we do have also some heads in our administration who thinks that once we get all the support from the West, we first will stop Russians and we will push the front line further to the right, and we'll be ready then for next negotiations from the position of force. And also the third option, one can listen to Lipsitz, Russian economist, who predicts that Russia will collapse today or tomorrow, and then Ukraine will have a complete victory. You know my point of view. I will say it once again to our listeners that we will conduct this mobilization rather successfully, however, but we'll get some troops for the front. But I'm not quite seeing us doing it the second time, for example, in the winter of 25. Here I'm very reluctant to predict our success in that mobilization, because one cannot see our people being too giddy about that perspective. And the measures, let's put it politely, that government is taking to tighten the bolts, and very weak gestures in terms of positive motivation and not solving the main issues like direct recruitment to brigades, will not help to bring more mobilized to the front. And look, the whole government machine now is aimed at catching the mobilized and throwing him to the front. Now many of them come to the front, get to the trench, look around and say, I don't want to fight. And then the problem is that all that government organization, all the district attorneys, telegram channels, mobilization orgs, they're all out there in the civil life. In the trench, he only has a commander. And here we have a company commander looking at 35 guys who don't want to fight. And what is he to do with them in the clear field? So the country managed to capture somebody, throw them to the front, and at the front there's only their immediate commander. There's a company leader there, and he has no apparatus to make sure that they do fight or do anything with them. And what? And then you'll have another 100,000 refusers, deserters, who will leave the front and trenches. And many of them actually, Alexey, the same problem is being discussed by cadre military now, especially and also by the ones who are not necessarily our fans, but they're talking about the same points. Exactly, Nikolai. So if we manage to gather 300,000 or 200,000 to mobilize, what if another 100,000 leaves the front? What would be the percent of effectiveness of our mobilization? Because all these prosecutors' offices, district attorneys, and other enforcement agencies, they're not present in the front. It's just a commander with a notepad and a pistol facing, let's say, 35 men with rifles on their shoulders who are looking at him with blue, gray, and brown eyes and saying, we don't want to fight. And this young officer is looking at them and thinking, what the heck should I do with them? While the country is pushing him to counterattack, to capture some position, or at least to hold some, he doesn't have a solution. And the country is not allowing brigades to recruit directly. Right. The country is doing anything they can so that the right mobilized do not come to the front, but the wrong ones do. And I already hear a lot of upset murmur from different directions, and they're talking about something is wrong. Something is wrong with our government. And there probably are spies in it. And I know our country likes counter intel. aspect of work, so we're always looking for spies, but I want to say that these issues have been with this government for a long time. And unfortunately, if they do not change that, we will not be able to sell that proverbial elephant, like in the anecdote, and it'll be difficult for us to hold Lugansk and Donetsk regions, despite all the aid that we get from the West. There is another publication, not Ukrainian, but it talks about hype, not mobilization. It outlines that instead of effective process, Ukrainian powers ignite animosity between their citizens. And there's an interesting passage here that talks about one of the promises with which Syrskyi was appointed to command armed forces of Ukraine was that they will not conduct mass mobilization, and that they'll find some other options internally. And apparently they are looking for these. Reserves. Recently, we were approached, according to the article, by one of their readers who serves in the brigade command. They got reinforcements from those military who are abusing alcohol and drugs, and instead of being decommissioned, they somehow were being thrown to the infantry. So those who are fighting in artillery and other detachments, they're basically scraping drone operators and everybody else, and those who were almost decommissioned for medical or psychological or other reasons. And by doing so, they're actually lowering the battle worthiness of the brigades fighting on the front. So they're exploiting those inner reserves which they thought exist. Looks like, if we can consider that an insight. But do you think that's the reality of it? Well, Nikolai, this is not about my view. They actually have been scraping a lot. We already have the administrative, the air defense, the artillerists, and everybody they could find in excess or remove from other detachments and throw them to the front line. But here we have a question. We have 1.3 million people on the front in our army. Russians managed to create local pressure and be more concentrated on certain parts of the front. But something doesn't jive right? I understand we need to keep some troops in the north to possibly protect us from Belarus. We are keeping a lot of troops on the Belarus direction, but Russians in Belarus basically just keep their 5 battalions. So there is definite imbalance there. And I do have a question to the whole military org. What the heck is going on? How come for 2.5 years they managed to create local advantage when we have twice more people in our military? How are we using them? It would be nice to do some audit and to understand the details of these questions. And time again, when the situation gets worse, we are bringing these questions, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, today, Ocheretina, and then they disappear. They fade into obscurity. So we write off those who bring up these questions to the bucket of spies, and then this question is dormant again until a next Bakhmut appears. And then we spent 5 months adopting the mobilization bill. And even that bill is adopted in such a format that it doesn't solve key problems and still poses a huge question about the quality of mobilized and the consequences of such mobilization. In the meantime, in the forces, we're losing specialists of very high training because air defense people, they take a lot more training than the infantrymen. Right, so the question, Alexey, even if now we mobilize the number of people we need, we'll need to train them, right? We don't even have that capacity, I think. Exactly, you need to train them. When Russians called upon 350,000, they dropped 150,000 to the trenches immediately without much training. So they called upon, and 5 days later they were dying near Liman, and sometimes the next day after mobilization. But they had to plug holes in the front. They had a chronic deficiency at this point. And the other half, they've trained, and then they threw them to the front. Now they stopped training them again. They need more people, so they're throwing mobilized to the front immediately. But I would remind our viewers that there were troops, there were some detachments that were sitting, waiting for almost a year, waiting to be trained, because all Russian training capacity is about 100,000. So if you called upon twice that capacity, you cannot train them all. They've even used another 10,000 option for training in Belarus, but yeah, that didn't help them much. Our training capacity is maybe 100,000, maybe. Under missiles and in the current situation, probably less. So imagine we accumulated 300,000 people, then the training would be another big question. And as I said before, mobilization is a serious exam that our country needs to pass if we are to survive. But in the fashion that we are passing it, or is there a mark such as C with 2 minuses? I don't think it exists. Well, we are at that mark due to the level of our country leadership and management. Right, it's not an F. I'm not a pessimist, but we have a horrible C with 4 minuses now. We'll probably be going to be at a 5th minus with it, but it's still a C, according to our government estimators. All right, Alexey, I watched your stream with Yulia Latinina recently. You proclaimed several theses about this possible negotiations and potentiality of a just peace at the end of this war. I also noticed that Zelensky did mention that in June we may start looking for an option of a just peace. And I think your just peace is different from his version, because in your piece I think he is almost an obstacle on the way to it. No, this is not in my explanation. This is how dear Western partners see that. My point of view is simple. It would be fantastic if President Zelensky became an ideal president and would have solved all of these tasks that we're mentioning here. Life places a lot more tasks in front of our country. We're just noting some of them. Frankly, I would love if we won this war under this president, have reached our borders of 91, have defeated the Moscow Reich, and gathered the best team to run our country and run our military. But you know, I caught myself thinking that I'm not surprised anymore. I'm not surprised to such a degree that I'm surprised that I'm not surprising. And there's only one question left. You know, I'm for President Zelensky since my childhood and his team. I only have one question left. Are they capable of solving these tasks? For example, I'm against elections during war, but can we get out of this trouble without elections? I'm against attacking and criticizing military and political leadership, but if we don't criticize them, can they work? Can they actually keep working and finding solutions? I would prefer that the current victory in this war to be provided by our current president and his administration, but are they capable? Well, listen, Alexey, if we look at the story with Azerbaijan that we also brought up in several discussions, and I think it's important because people were building a configuration of the outcome for themselves, waiting for the window of opportunity, and when they found it, they realized it. And they haven't really trumpeted their plans too much. They were just quietly doing what they deemed worth doing. And I want to ask a question. Do we understand in Ukraine that this situation is for dozens of years? Or are we still trying to solve everything with one swoop? All these problems that were aggregated since the Second World War. It seems, Nikolai, we all want more PR. Because, damn, why it's only Arestovich outside of the country riding his yacht or whatever, and I'm sitting in the trenches and only have 3,000 subscribers, or I work in the office for so many years and nobody gives me money worth what I'm worth. Because the number of compatriots who tried to aggregate that social capital during war times, which they otherwise couldn't have accumulated to such degree, is huge. That number is astounding. So I'm looking at our TV, I'm turning our TV marathon. That actually hit me even back in 2014. The fighter from so-and-so brigade is saying strategic plans of China are in treacherously deceiving United States and also capturing half of Russia. And when he's being asked, okay, where are you fighting? Which direction of the front, which part of the front are you fighting on? He's saying, I'm on a secret part, but from my trench you can see what China is doing really well. We have bloggers removing battalion commanders because of their publications in social media. We have announcing all the counteroffensive and all the plans and everything else, just like we announced a year ago, our counteroffensive. So I'll remind our listeners that, every Ukrainian deems himself or herself to be a president and supreme commander-in-chief, and everybody is supreme commanding-in-chief. And everybody appears to be either making statements about that or pretending that they are commanding. So what's surprising here? Ukraine, Nikolai, is a huge machine for building social capital. People are holding it tooth and nail. And you know what is the main machine these days in aggregating this capital? Middle-aged women and elderly men who run around leaving comments under different videos and statements and posts that we are sitting here in Ukraine and bombs and you are overseas, you're dirty, rotten scoundrels and cowards. And I do want to ask a question here. Do you think, who of us needs more decisiveness and more courage? Somebody who is sitting in Ukraine, yes, under bombs, but literally functioning as before that. Or somebody who had to leave the country and start everything from scratch and find resources to maintain his families, his relatives, who needs to discover new skills, broaden horizon, understand new traditions, learn languages. And while nobody is listening to us, most of Ukrainians who left the country, they work overseas, they work abroad in Europe as well, 10 times more than the rest are working in Ukraine. Because, yes, you're being bombed, you're hiding in the shelter during the bombs. But here, outside of Ukraine, simple citizens whom I meet, they work so much harder that it's very hard-pressed to find somebody working that much in Ukraine. That's why all this discussion about those who left are cowards and those who stayed are heroes, it devaluates the understanding of heroes. Because when those Ukrainians who left and lived for 3 years overseas and learned the languages and were building their business and building their capital, they'll come back and look at Ukrainians who stayed there. They'll find themselves 4 heads above everybody else. And when somebody who was proclaimed to be a hero, for whatever reason, will not be able to catch up with those defectors, with those cowards who left, who were supporting military and their families just monetarily. It would be an interesting picture to see. It'll be like high schoolers trying to explain the university graduates that they understand more about life. Did anyone ever calculate, I wonder, in our country that all these statements, all this official position of government devaluates those who remain? And most people never dreamt of becoming a hero. Just in their lifestyle, what they're doing, they're giddily putting the mask of a hero, the posture of a hero onto themselves right now. And with all due respect, yes, they are risking their lives being under bombs. But one can find that this is only achievement that they can boast. They have nothing else except for, yes, sitting under bombs. While other Ukrainians who left, they're learning the third language already. Here's a simple example. In one of the Telegram channels, Minister of Defense of Poland, who said that men of the conscription age, if they're being requested by Ukraine to be sent out back to Ukraine from EU, they're discussing on the level of the European Council how to send them back to Ukraine. Everybody fainted, right, in Ukraine? When you open the source over here, it says that he apologized for that statement earlier. It will only be discussed if the whole Europe decides to do that. Otherwise, they are not at risk. So it's a completely 180 reversal from the meaning that's being peddled around in Ukraine. People in Ukraine are being kept in a system of mirrors, of smoke and mirrors. And many media are hyping on different scandals and fake news. And unfortunately, these weird mushrooms of vanity and fake heroism is being peddled by and supported by our government. And those Ukrainians who left, very often, they already exceed the ones who stayed by already many areas of knowledge. In my experience, just meeting people here, only by the understanding of human rights, of speaking different languages, of how different systems work in different countries. Every third Ukrainian, all those who left, they're already much more educated in this regard than those who stayed. And all that heroism, even of those who are fighting in the trenches right now, will be devaluated because of this idiotic route chosen for this sort of meta-election campaign by the current administration. Because dividing Ukrainians into classes, one can find that those who left Ukraine actually present a lot more social value with their skills and knowledge than those who are attacking them in the social media sitting under Russian bombs. Do you understand the size of the bomb that's being planted under our society? We devaluate the meaning of a hero. While we do have 100,000 of those, there are tons of those in the country. Those who work under bombs, those who fight in the trenches, but their heroism is being undervalued by those people who are just donating and sitting under bombs. They're not learning languages. They're not getting education in Europe. They're not building businesses. They're not discovering the world for themselves. I caught myself thinking, I'm actually of pretty high esteem of my thinking method, but I did catch myself that in the last 6 months of forced political immigration, I gathered so much data that I probably would be hard-pressed to gather that much in 3 lifetimes in Ukraine. My whole worldview had changed. I got so many acquaintances and friends in different spheres that even working in Ukraine in the office of the president and participating in the international elections, I was not exposed to maybe 20th of the volume of data that I was exposed to in the last 6 months. And I understand also that, of course, we can say that we know well about the West and we don't know maybe Asia and China. I want to tell you, we don't know the West. Our Ukrainian compatriots do not know anything about United States. They only can see those countries based on some perverted picture of Telegram channels that they cross-share. They live in a very fake world that has been distorted on purpose sometimes to such degree that it is completely 180 from the real truth. And unfortunately, due to lack of command of other languages, many of our citizens in Ukraine cannot verify the original source. And if I'll have to stay here longer in the West, I understand that I probably will be 3 heads higher than I am now. And I understand why my destiny headed for me to be out here and not in Ukraine. I'm being educated. Uncle Alexey is undergoing another education course, how the whole world works. That's why I'm saying they don't understand what they're doing in the country. But I'm glad we do have our stream. Here's when we discuss different things and options and possibilities and things that are good and things that are bad. And I would suggest our military political leadership in Ukraine to start listening to the things we discuss, to avoid losing the war in a frame that you expect you'd win it in. And then you'd actually face much dire consequences personally. I'm not even talking about consequences for the whole country, which will be grievous. All right, this is probably a good point to remind our viewers that we support Ukrainian armed forces, and there is a link under the stream. There is a fundraiser for 58th, 16th brigades. They're raising 230,000 hryvnias. There is no pacifist option today. I know we were supporting Estonian children, right? We gathered the right amount. I think we got enough funds to last for a month and a half. After that, we'll bring it up again. We also help children in Konstantinovka, that's closer to the front line. And once that they record a thank you, we'll definitely post it on our socials. And at current rate, we're closing 3-4 serious fundraisers. And today we're raising money for the radio electronic interference for one brigade that is being tortured by FPV drones of our foes. And they're losing a lot of lives because of that factor. So now we're trying to help them to get the radio electronic device that prevents some of these drones functioning next to their positions. So if you don't want to participate in a fundraiser for military assets, you can participate in this one. This is a mechanism to defend lives. All right, let's go to another segment, Alexey. There is a whole document and a scandal around it that our government sent to the Secretariat of EU about changing our own obligations on the European documents, including European Convention of Human Rights. And I want to start that segment with a simple question. Very often we talk about closed borders, that it is supposedly the West that would want us to close borders and to keep our people in Ukraine, limiting their freedom of movement. Right, this was pitched into our media sphere under the banner that these were the agreements with Europe, and Arestovich is peddling some propaganda against it. Let me open a rather scary mystery for our listeners here. This document was submitted to EU on the 4th of April. I actually had a post in my socials about that. On the 4th of April, we sent, as a country, our government sent this request to the EU Secretariat before limiting the consular services for our people. What do Europeans say? They're saying that they're shocked at what is going on, and in convincing attempt at smoke and mirrors by our government, and I feel for the Minister of Justice who was sent to try to explain all of that zoo. That attempt is based entirely on hope that nobody will go and read the original document in English. I think the only way we can save Ukraine from these encroachments would be to make sure that our people speak English. It is a definite bottleneck, and we need to make sure our education has it covered, our people speak English. Because what our powers are saying, those unnamed people who run after me in my comment box and under my posts, they're saying that all countries apply different things to the Secretariat. Ukraine sent a document in 2014 and sent one in 22. Indeed, we did. That part is true. And as Malushko is saying, we have removed some limitations. That is true. But we have also added a few points. And Europeans were not just stunned, they were shocked after reading what we suggest to have rights to do in Ukraine now. And there are articles there that they estimate in Europe to have no relation to fighting this war. For example, why certain limitations are being introduced for liability. For example, if in 2014, if Russian shells destroyed somebody's house, they could have sued our own state under the pretense that the government did not protect their home, and the government would have to pay money for that. So in 2014, we sent a document to EU, to European Human Rights Court, saying that, hey, requests like that should not be reviewed because we are a victim of Russian aggression. It has nothing to do with our usual life. So what's happening now? Article 8, I'm translating here from this document. Respect to private and family life. Article 10, freedom of expression. Article 11, freedom of association and gatherings. Right for free movement, freedom of movement for people. First article, protection of private property. Second, education. Third, right of choice. These are not prolonged for Ukraine, or we're requesting them to be not prolonged. And Europeans start asking questions, how freedom of education prevents you from conducting war, from defending yourself. On the technical side, however, that's our students who entered universities back in 2016, 2018, 2020, before the big war. And they're trying to finish the last year of some German university, but they can't because the government doesn't provide them consular services. And now we're also blocking any attempt by the student to get justice with the European Court. Next matter, private property, for example, arrests of your bank accounts, expropriation of your vehicle. Or, for example, when you, as somebody who refuses to fight at war, Ukraine may cancel your driving license. Earlier, you could turn to EU for that matter. Now you can't because of this document. Then the right for aggregation, the right for freedom of choice, that is a question about, elections during the war times, okay, maybe. But the right for self-expression, Department of State in the United States already mentioned that this is a serious encroachment on human rights. And by the way, I can announce here that soon Transparency International is going to publish a bunch of materials, and they're not favorable for Ukraine. They're realistic, but yeah, we would not like them. Another important one is the right for family life, because right now I think at least 2 million Ukrainians can file with the European Court for freedom to reunite. Part of the family is across the border, outside of Ukraine, and the other part, probably a man of a drafting age, is in the country and cannot come visit his wife or relatives. So you can file with an EU court and win it. And these are the upset opinions of European experts, bureaucrats of a high caliber. They're also saying that they acknowledge that Ukraine made these changes on the 4th of April before tightening the bolts inside the country to avoid legal action both outside of Ukraine and inside of Ukraine, because European courts will definitely side with the side of law, not with the side of this request. And what they could do in EU, they could give special passports or certain visas to Ukraine refugees in light of these actions of the government. But unfortunately, our citizens very often are illiterate on the legal field. They are not aware of what they are due and how the government should be protecting them from certain elements of life and certain events. Since we did sign a human rights charter with EU, and if we were better educated, I think our citizens would have dumped at least 5 million different lawsuits onto the European Human Rights Court and at our own government and legal system. And I understand that, of course, there are some things that can be limited during war times, but there are others that have no relation to fighting wars. And we, on the 4th of April, submitted a paper with a bunch of restrictions that have no direct relation to waging the war. And they were classified as significantly undermining human rights by experts in Europe. And Europe had posted a yellow tape around that paper with big letters, authoritarianism. And there was another uncomfortable story that unfolded during that time. Meanwhile, Ukrainian delegation visited Brussels in negotiations or in attempt to join EU. They got a cold shower there. We will likely get our framework in July after elections into EU Parliament. The framework will be very narrow and it'll probably be mostly focused on the legal aspects, and it'll take us forever, just like Turkey, to hopefully join EU someday. And the main blame would be that you did not follow through with the standard procedures that every country joining the EU needs to go through. They're basically saying that we sabotaged the process as a country, and they're saying that when Ukrainian government understood that they have nothing to lose now, that EU is not an option anymore. And for different reasons, one can say it's because of war or because our government doesn't really want to fight corruption. They understand that EU is waving goodbye, so they are now trying to tighten the bolts. The most extreme of the experts in Europe are saying, well, it looks like they don't want to have next elections in Ukraine ever. It looks like, they're tightening the bolts, taking away the freedoms, and poor Ukrainian cannot even file a lawsuit. First of all, they don't even know that they can. And now, after they learn, European Human Rights Court might not even consider their case. The reality is different in this case. This is not up to Ukrainian government at this point, and European Human Rights Court will review your cases, especially Ukrainians who are outside of Ukraine now. It will be easier for you to do that, and you will be protected. And all these fairy tales that you'll be grabbed and thrown back into Ukraine, don't pay attention to that. That may be supported partially by Poland and some of the Baltic countries and some of the parties there, but that's their local point of view, not supported by EU at large. They're just seeing a lot of Ukrainians, getting their jobs or taking their women as wives. They're not happy with it, so they're supportive of some of these restrictions. But most European countries are not. And by the way, Stoltenberg did say that nobody's taking Ukraine into NATO. EU is not going to denounce that we may become a member, but they will be slow walking that. And in reality, they cannot allow a country that limits human rights so much to be its member. And I think there was a third reason. Since our government discovered that indeed Americans have passed the aid bill, that Europeans will give us about 100 billion over several years. They'll give us a couple dozen billions now, and then they'll probably get another 60 billion for themselves, for their military-industrial complex, to produce more. So we will have enough military aid. And at this point, our country leadership figured that they don't need to be afraid much. Because before, their destiny was tied to following the human rights roadmap and several other roadmaps they needed to follow. Right now, this link was disconnected, and they don't have to do that. And here is our diplomacy supporting military angle of the government, and who cares about human rights? And hey, we're still getting missiles. That means that we can do whatever we want. But they're wrong, because if they think they got lucky card and they can do as they please, they're seriously wrong. Europe has not made decision on this document yet and on our future in general, but they're discussing and they're seriously concerned with this trend. Understandably, war is an important factor, but you need to limit the encroachments on human rights. And they're saying that the fact that you're bringing up Minister of Justice to speak to the camera about a month after you sent this document and only when it became a scandal, this is very unfair to your own people. These limits need to be approved at large by society and only then be sent to European court. They cannot review that seriously because there was no discussion in the Ukrainian society. And we didn't. We sent a letter, hush hush, and now coming out a month later saying, oh, it was all regulated, it was all agreed upon. No. All those who are trying to defend this point of view, big hello to them. They look really funny now because Europe doesn't want to play this game. They are not supporting this motion. It reminded me of Yanukovych, right, and his politics. Exactly, Alexey. I wanted to remind us about Yanukovych. That was his framework, that they cannot let the biggest country in the middle of Europe to go bankrupt, so somebody will save us. That was his mantra back when he was a president. And he was saying that everybody wants us from all sides. Russia wants us, EU wants us. We need to look around and pick the one who gives us more. Where did his strategy bring us? Well, we all know. Similar to that, exactly. And now, my opinion. I think, in my view, a very bad thing happened. And I'm not giddy about that. I have a lot of sadness, and I'm upset about this thing. In Europe, they very clearly decoupled the destiny of President Zelensky and the destiny of Ukraine. They are now building two different strategies in relation to one and in relation to the other. And however much they shake our hands and smile and take pictures with Zelensky, especially politicians from Europe, that Zelensky is Ukraine, right, as they say in Putin in Russia, Putin is Russia. I remember the legendary phrase by Müller from 18 Moments of Spring, who said that Führer brought Germany to catastrophe and you should not be mixing the interests of the country with the interests of the Führer. And to his opponent in a conversation, he says, you need to now ask me loudly, do you understand what you just said? And I need to answer loudly, yes, I do. Because there is no listening devices in this room, and nobody will trust you if you decide to repeat my words to somebody. And you probably won't have guts to do that. But unless you're playing a more keen game than I am, you do understand deep inside that Hitler brought our Germany to a catastrophe, and I don't see an exit out of this situation. Do you understand me? I don't. That's a quote. As for me, I do see an exit, and Europeans will find it too, but they're holding their heads now and asking, can you explain what's going on? And yeah, I do know what's going on. One of the other discoveries here in the West, we are seemed in Ukraine where we see ourselves as so mysterious that we have our own Ukrainian soul that is so different, and only we understand what's happening here. The fact is, in the EU and in the United States, they understand our trends 100 times better than our politologists. They understand it rather clearly. That's why it would be impossible to deceive them. This attempt, this letter, it caused such a shock. They evaluated it as authoritarian turn in our politics, and they're saying now there are two different things. One thing is military support of Ukraine. So here we kick Russian propagandists out, who's saying that there'll be no aid anymore. No, there will be aid. Ukraine will have means to fight, but Zelensky equals Ukraine is not a meaningful slogan for them, as long as he behaves himself this way. Now, if he changes his behavior, the trust will come back. But, perhaps I'm skeptic. Perhaps I'm a coward who gave up, right? But I do not have faith that Zelensky's government will change its ways. Right, Alexey? I don't quite see why and how would they. There was also his direct speech over a year ago, I think. He said also in EU or in some other European institution. The video is now being replicated and shared in TikToks. He said that we're a democratic state, we need to develop, and we're defending freedoms and democratic values. We cannot use sticks to push people into the war. We're not a country like that, because here is the paradox. We're fighting for European values and we want to be members of EU. That's why even fighting, we need to maintain these values. Right, Nikolai. And today we're discussing whether we should draft inmates or not. Remember how much they were laughing at the Russian idea when they were doing it? So I think one of the major questions we need to ask, and historians need to post at the end of this war, and we as Ukrainian citizens need to ask it now: how did it happen that huge enthusiasm of people that drew them to big lines to the drafting points on the 23rd of March turned into hundreds of thousands refusers and deserters and millions of people who don't want to defend their country? 24th of February, you wanted to say. Yeah, 24th of February. How did that come about? What did we do? Crap, we've done a ton of demotivating actions against our people, which absolutely don't work in our favor. End of part 1.